When you have kids, you have to read to them every day, and pretty quickly you get through the classics of children's literature. Most of them are quite good, certainly in comparison with the utter bilge being churned out today, but The Secret Garden was especially compelling. I was deeply moved by it, and I was amazed by how brilliant it was. It stood out to me even from other classic children's stories, not by the clarity of the prose or because the story is especially thrilling. Instead, it was the way that every element of the story, from plot and characters to the setting and themes, were all in perfect alignment, all pulling together and uniting to emphasise and elevate them all into something greater. And so if you're interested in improving your own writing, in enhancing the way you tell your own stories, or if you just want to better understand how good stories are formed, then there's no better novel to learn from, in my opinion, than The Secret Garden. It's a children's story, so it's relatively straightforward and simple, easy to understand, and easy to see what the author is doing. It's a perfect example, in my opinion. I'm going to spoil the story for you now, but if you haven't read it, I don't think it matters if you know what happens first. The beauty of it is in the telling. Anyway, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett was first serialised and then published as a novel in 1911. It's about a little girl called Mary Lennox, who was born and raised in colonial India to wealthy parents. She's an unwanted and unloved child who grows up rude and entitled. When she's 9, her parents die in a cholera outbreak and the surviving servants abandon her. She's discovered and shunted by various people back to England and to her uncle by marriage, Archibald Craven. He lives in a large gloomy country house named Misselthwaite Manor on the desolate Yorkshire moors. He is a gloomy, miserable man, bereaved and in mourning for 10 years since the tragic death of his young wife, and is usually absent from the great house. Little Mary finds herself unwanted in her new home too, ignored and unloved. Left by the housekeeper, Mrs. Medlock, to wander the house and grounds alone. She interacts with an old gardener, with a young housemaid called Martha, and a little robin shows her a key buried in the earth, which she finds unlocks the door to a walled garden. The garden is wild and overgrown, all weeds and tangles. In secret, she starts to care for the garden, clearing the weeds and planting seeds. Her maid Martha enlists the help of her younger brother Dickon, who rescues wild animals and knows all about nature. At night, Mary hears wailing in the house and eventually discovers a cousin her own age called Colin, who is an invalid, confined to his bed, who often throws terrible infantile tantrums. Mary tells Colin about the secret garden and she takes him to the garden in his wheelchair. Over time, Mary, Colin and Dickon work hard in the garden to bring it back to its full glory. Gradually and secretly, Colin begins to regain his health, and Mary becomes a kinder, happier child, having found her place in her family and in the world. Ultimately, Colin and his father are reunited in joy, and they and the entire household and staff at Misselthwaite Manor are healed and filled with happiness and hope for the future. Proper order is restored, and everything is right again in the world. There are many ways to break down the craft of storytelling and novel writing into its constituent parts. In creative writing courses, you'll usually see categories like the plot or overarching structure, the core conflict or obstacles, the setting, which is the time and the place, the characters, focusing most of all on the protagonist, the main character, description, dialogue, the style or tone, the kind of language used, symbolism within the story, and the themes, like the deeper meanings of the story beneath everything happening on the surface. You know, what the story is really about. There's more and different ways to break down a story, of course, but that'll do us for now. So, what you want to try to do as a writer is ensure that all these various elements of a story work together in harmony. It's not always easy to carry out, but any disconnections between these elements can make your story feel unfocused or even confusing. There are various themes in this story. The most prominent are perhaps death and rebirth, in that way that nature dies back to brittle twigs and brown leaves in autumn, before the branches burst forth into life once more in spring forever. The structure of the whole story reflects this theme, as it opens with scenes of disease and death and ends with rebirth and new life. It's the cycle of the seasons in the arc of a few months in one girl's life. It ends with the characters who were once in a state of stasis or near death, now looking and feeling healthy and talking hopefully of the future. And their future involves maturing, marrying, and having children of their own. The endless cycle of the generations mirroring that of the seasons. Mary and Colin's dead mothers loom over them throughout the story. In Colin's case, her portrait literally looms over his bed, which he never leaves. You should do this sort of thing in your stories. Make the symbolism manifest in the physical world. The death of Colin's mother 10 years earlier is the tragedy at the heart of the story. It occurred in the walled garden, that is, the secret garden. The tragedy broke Colin's father, Archibald Craven, and he's been in mourning ever since. His heartbreak meant he could never love Colin. He saw his wife in him, and the pain was too much, and his misery was made manifest in Colin's psychosomatic illness. Treating Colin as if he was sick, shutting him away for his entire childhood, has of course made him weak and fragile. It's made him sick. He's never been allowed to grow strong. The garden is shut up like Archibald's heart. The house is shut up too. Most of the rooms are closed off, just like Colin and his father. The arrival of Mary is the catalyst for changing this emotional state, and she physically explores the house and grounds. She goes into the dark rooms and the walled garden, opens them up, and brings her life to them, as she brings life to Colin and Archibald Craven. The events in the story, the characters' physical actions in the world, reflect the inner emotional states and changes of the characters. They're not just doing stuff, it's not just a plot. Everything that happens is purposeful. The setting reflects the themes, and the characters and the settings change as the characters change. Mary begins the story in India, and it's made clear by the author that this is a place she doesn't belong. She understands from overheard conversations and by their absence that she is unwanted by her mother and father. Since birth, Mary has been in the care of Indian servants whose only job was to keep the girl out of sight of her parents. Due to the racial inequality, the cowed Indian servants made no attempt to raise Mary properly and just gave her everything she asked for to keep her quiet so they didn't get in trouble. Being so spoiled, English governesses employed to educate her abandoned her due to her rudeness and tyrannical behaviour. Not only is India unbearably hot for the English constitution, a terrible epidemic then killed her parents, and the servants abandon her for good. They have no emotional connection to the child. The land and its people are not for Mary. She should not be here. Perhaps this is intended to say something critical about colonialism, but it's not a political story. When Mary is eventually relocated to Yorkshire, she will find that she is now in her homeland. She's never been to England before, but it's where she's supposed to be. The wild moors and the tamed gardens are what heal her. The setting, an English manor house on the edge of wildness, is like Mary. She is an English girl on the edge of wildness, in need of a little light and air and tenderness and love. The setting changes her, and she changes the setting. She brings life and love to the house and people, just as it and they change her. All the characters are in the story for multiple storytelling reasons. They help to drive or enable the plot. They are symbols or motifs that convey themes, and they are absolutely rooted in the Yorkshire setting. The young maid Martha is a lovely Yorkshire girl who responds to Mary's rudeness with good humour. Her innate kindness is the first that Mary has ever experienced, and it begins to change her. Although they're a different social class, they can relate to one another in a way that Mary never could with her Indian servants. Martha gets Mary a skipping rope that starts to make her strong and fit, and also introduces her little brother Dickon to Mary. Dickon is like a personification of the Yorkshire moors. Half wild himself, he's also like a shepherd or a ranger, finding injured and lost wild animals on the moor, raising them by hand, and then they follow him around. This motif is reflected, of course, in Mary, who is another little wild animal he rescues and gently cares for. He's completely of the land, an embodiment of it. It's as if he's emerged from the Yorkshire earth itself. Mary at one point, after Dickon delivers her gardening tools, wonders if she has been visited by a wood fairy. You just know that his ancestors have been here for centuries, for millennia, ever since the dawn of time. Martha and Dickon's mother, Susan Sowerby, has an important part in the story, steering events from afar in her cottage, advising Archibald on what to do with Mary at the start, and she writes the pivotal letter that brings Archibald Craven home at the climax of the story. Again, she is absolutely of the land, a loving maternal archetype, a sensible and good-hearted Yorkshire woman with 12 children. She's the first mother figure that Mary has ever known. The Yorkshireness of the characters is conveyed in various ways, but most prominently perhaps in the dialogue. You see this in old novels, where they try to convey foreign and regional accents in the dialogue itself, sometimes with phonetic spellings. That's not really the done thing these days, as people find it condescending and insulting or whatever, and it can also be a struggle to understand when overdone or done poorly. But this novel does it pretty well, I think, with the liberal application of apostrophes to convey the Yorkshire dialect. Mary also learns unique Yorkshire phrases and concepts. Again, it provides a deep sense of place. By the end, the aristocratic Mary and Colin are able to speak in the Yorkshire dialect if they wish. The language has changed them, and their use of it tells us that they have become of the earth, of the land themselves. By the end of the story, the supporting characters have become Mary's family, the family that she needed in order to be healed and find her place in the world. Colin is a beloved cousin and friend. Archibald is a caring uncle. Dickon, Martha and their mother are a different social class, but they're now like loving elder siblings and a mother figure. But the characters are also symbolic figures. Archibald not only becomes a father figure, but represents a broken and then healed masculinity in the form of the head of the household. Mrs. Sowerby is the maternal figure personified. She has a huge number of children pouring forth from her lively rural cottage, as if her abundant fertility cannot be contained. The themes and character are also conveyed in the descriptions, especially of the garden, as Mary carefully brings it back to life. Her pulling up the weeds to find the beauty beneath is described over and over in various ways. It's as if the whole story is being told in a line of description or a line of dialogue. It's something like a fractal pattern, where the whole arc of the story takes place in a sentence, in a scene or a chapter, or in all of them, over and over again. Calling this novel a perfect example of this kind of integration doesn't mean it's faultless or couldn't be improved or is the best story ever. Just for example, Mary, the protagonist, drives the story throughout, until the end when she fades into the background and Colin and his father take over. Although this could be intentional too, it could be that the author intended to convey that the proper order has been restored, where the feminine in society exists to quietly and domestically support the masculine, who then go out and act upon the world. But who knows? Anyway, there's lots to learn from studying this novel, and I very much recommend reading it if you haven't already. And if you have, then perhaps try reading it again with this kind of thing in mind. What we want to do with our stories is choose every chapter, paragraph, line and word with intention. We should be conveying themes and character in every word we write. Every word is an opportunity to tell the story. It's honestly not easy to do, and although some writers seem to do it by instinct, the rest of us have to work on our craft over the years. And if we can do half as good a job as Frances Hodgson Burnett in The Secret Garden, then we'll be well on our way. Please comment below any questions you might have, and let me know if there are particular storytelling elements you'd be interested in learning more about in future. Thank you very much for watching.